They said his name in whispers, not because he was loud, not because he bragged, but because power doesn't need noise to be feared. In the heart of Harlem, there was a man who moved through the streets like a shadow with weight, not just respected, not just feared, but understood. Understood as someone you never crossed. Understood as someone whose silence spoke louder than violence. Understood as someone whose loyalty meant protection, and whose betrayal meant consequences. Before we talk about what happened, you need to understand the world he lived in. This wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a system, a code, a structure built on rules no one wrote down, but everyone followed. Trust wasn't emotional, it was strategic. Loyalty wasn't symbolic, it was survival. In his world, loyalty was currency, more valuable than money, more powerful than fear. Because money could be replaced, fear could be managed. But betrayal changed everything. People didn't earn trust through words, they earned it through patterns, through consistency, through silence, through years of not slipping, not talking, not crossing lines, not getting comfortable. And that's what made his inner circle so small, not because he was distant, but because access was dangerous. The closer you got, the more responsibility you carried. The more your actions mattered, the more your mistakes cost. This video isn't just a story, it's a lesson about power, a lesson about loyalty, a lesson about what happens when someone mistakes access for safety, when someone confuses trust with weakness, when someone thinks proximity means protection. By the end of this video, you'll understand something deeper than a headline. You'll understand how power really works in closed worlds, how loyalty becomes law, how betrayal becomes a sentence, and how one small decision can change everything forever. Because the most dangerous mistakes aren't loud, they're quiet. They happen inside homes, inside trust, inside private spaces where people think they are safe. And the most powerful figures don't need to threaten. They don't need to explain. They don't need to explain. They don't need to perform. They observe, they wait, they confirm. And when they move with certainty. This isn't just about fear, it's about structure, it's about control, it's about a man who understood one simple truth. If you protect loyalty, loyalty protects you. If you allow betrayal, betrayal spreads. Stay with this story, because what you're about to hear isn't just shocking, it's revealing. It shows how trust works when the stakes are real, how power operates when the rules are silent, and why in some worlds, losing a job is the smallest consequence someone can face. Before we talk about the incident, it's important to understand how tightly guarded his personal life truly was. Very few people were ever allowed near his family, and that wasn't by accident. In his world, family was not just emotional, it was strategic. It was the one line that could never be crossed. Everything else could be negotiated. Family could not. Before we talk about the trust he gave, we have to understand how rare that trust actually was. Access to his home was limited. Access to his child was almost unheard of. People didn't just walk into that space because they were friendly or familiar. They were tested over time, watched quietly, evaluated in moments they didn't realize mattered. Before we talk about who he let in, we need to talk about who he kept out. Many people who worked around him for years never saw the inside of his home. They never met his family, not because they weren't useful, but because usefulness did not equal trust. He understood that the closer someone is, the more damage they can cause if they turn. Before we talk about safety, we have to talk about patience. Trust in his world was built slowly, layer by layer, small responsibilities first, minor access, limited information. Only after long periods of consistency would someone be allowed closer, and even then they were never fully relaxed. No one was ever above suspicion. Before we talk about loyalty, it's important to understand that words meant nothing, promises meant nothing. What mattered was behavior. Day after day, month after month, silence under pressure, discipline when no one was watching. People proved themselves by what they didn't say, not by what they offered. Before we talk about family protection, we must understand the system around it. Multiple layers existed between his private life and the outside world. Messengers, intermediaries, buffers. Each layer reduced risk. Each layer filtered information. Only those who passed through every layer earned the right to be close. Before we talk about emotional bonds, we have to talk about control. Allowing someone near your family meant surrendering a level of control, and he never did that lightly. He believed that love without structure invited chaos, that trust without limits invited betrayal. Before we talk about comfort, we need to understand discomfort. Anyone allowed near his family lived with constant awareness, awareness that they were being observed, awareness that nothing went unnoticed, awareness that respect was not optional, it was expected. Before we talk about the moment everything changed, we need to recognize this truth. Being allowed near his family was not a privilege, it was a responsibility, a test with no warning and no second chances. And in a world where trust was the rarest currency of all, those who held it were expected to protect it at all costs. Before we talk about the nanny, it's important to understand why this decision carried so much weight. Hiring someone to care for a child was not a simple task in his world. It was not about convenience, it was about control. This person would be inside his home around his child, and present during moments no outsider was ever meant to see. Before we talk about trust, we need to recognize what kind of access this role created. A nanny didn't just watch a child, she heard conversations, she noticed routines, she learned schedules, she saw who came and who left. In a life built on secrecy, that kind of exposure was dangerous if placed in the wrong hands. Before we talk about safety, we must talk about vulnerability. His child was the one part of his life that could not defend itself. Money couldn't protect that. Reputation couldn't protect that. Only careful decisions could. Allowing someone into that space meant placing faith in their silence, their judgment, and their discipline. Before we talk about qualifications, it's important to understand that skill alone was never enough. Being good with children did not automatically make someone trustworthy. He cared less about resumes and more about background, about patterns, about who a person associated with, about how they handled pressure when nothing was at stake. Before we talk about routine, we have to talk about risk. A nanny becomes part of the rhythm of a household. She knows when doors are locked, when guards change shifts, when the house is quiet. That knowledge in the wrong hands could become a weapon, and he understood that better than anyone. Before we talk about privacy, we must talk about exposure. His home was not just a living space, it was a command center. Decisions were made there, visitors were received there, conversations happened that were never meant to leave those walls. Bringing in a nanny meant opening a window into that world. Before we talk about comfort, we have to talk about boundaries. A nanny could never be treated like family. No matter how familiar she became, familiarity created blind spots, and blind spots created danger. He believed that respect had to be maintained at all times, even in moments of calm. Before we talk about emotional connection, we need to understand restraint. Children naturally bond with caregivers. That bond had to exist, but it also had to be managed. He watched closely how attachment formed, how discipline was handled, and how authority was respected. Before we talk about the decision itself, we must understand this. Hiring a nanny was not an act of trust, it was a calculated risk, one taken only after long observation and strict limits, because once someone was inside his home, they were no longer just an employee, they were a potential weakness, and in his world, weaknesses were never ignored. Before we talk about what she did, it's important to notice how trouble never arrives loudly. It comes in small, quiet pieces that are easy to dismiss. In this case, the first signs were subtle, so subtle that most people would have ignored them. Small things going missing, nothing valuable at first, just items that felt misplaced rather than stolen. Before we talk about suspicion, we need to talk about patterns. A single missing item means nothing, but when the same things disappear more than once, questions begin to form. Objects were moved, drawers felt different, spaces that were once orderly began to feel disturbed, as if someone had lingered longer than necessary. Before we talk about behavior, we must look at changes. Her tone shifted. She spoke less, or sometimes too much. She became overly cautious one day, careless the next. Her confidence felt uneven. There were moments when she avoided eye contact, followed by moments when she acted unusually relaxed, as if she believed no one was paying attention. Before we talk about observation, we need to understand that nothing escaped his notice. He didn't accuse. He didn't react. He watched. He listened. He allowed time to reveal truth. He believed that lies collapse under their own weight if given enough space. Before we talk about rumors, we have to understand how they travel, not through confrontation, through whispers, through side conversations, through brief looks exchanged between people who noticed the same thing but didn't want to be the first to speak. Quiet comments, careful words, nothing direct, nothing provable. Before we talk about trust breaking, we must talk about discomfort. She seemed uneasy in familiar spaces. She lingered in rooms where she had no reason to be. She asked questions that felt out of place, questions about routines, about schedules, about who came and went. Before we talk about denial, we need to talk about rationalization. People around her explained away the signs: stress, fatigue, personal issues. They wanted things to remain calm. They wanted to believe nothing was wrong. And in that desire, they overlooked what was right in front of them. Before we talk about confirmation, we must talk about silence. No one confronted her. No one warned her. The silence wasn't mercy. It was strategy. Because in this world, proof mattered more than suspicion, and action only came after certainty. Before we talk about the moment everything became clear, it's important to understand this. Warning signs rarely scream. They whisper. And those who survive longest are the ones who listen closely when something feels slightly off. Before we talk about what was uncovered, it's important to understand that betrayal rarely looks dramatic at first. It hides behind routine, behind familiarity, behind the belief that no one is watching closely. In this case, the nanny wasn't reckless. She was comfortable, and comfort is where mistakes begin. Before we talk about her actions, we need to talk about abuse of position. She wasn't acting out of desperation. She was acting out of opportunity. She believed her role made her invisible. That being trusted around a child meant her movements wouldn't be questioned, that her presence had become normal enough to blend into the background. Before we talk about discovery, it's important to understand what she thought she knew. She believed she understood the house, the patterns, the people. She thought she knew when attention was focused elsewhere. She assumed routines meant predictability, and predictability, in her mind, meant safety. Before we talk about specifics, we need to talk about intention. She crossed lines quietly, took liberties she was never given, used moments of privacy to do things that had nothing to do with her job, each step small enough to justify to herself, each action easier than the last. Before we talk about betrayal, we must understand mindset. She wasn't bold. She was careless in a different way. She believed proximity meant protection, that being close to power somehow made her immune to its reach. She confused access with authority. Before we talk about what was noticed, we need to understand what she underestimated. She underestimated patience. She underestimated observation. She underestimated a man who never relied on assumptions. She believed that because no one had spoken, no one had seen. Before we talk about confrontation, it's important to understand how long this went on. Long enough for her confidence to grow. Long enough for her to stop checking herself. Long enough to believe she was smarter than the system around her. Before we talk about the truth, we must talk about silence again. No accusations were made. No reactions shown. Her behavior was allowed to continue just long enough to remove doubt. Just long enough to expose intention rather than accident. Before we talk about the weight of her actions, we need to understand this. What she did wasn't shocking because it was loud. It was shocking because it was deliberate. Because she knew better. Because she believed she was untouchable. And in believing that, she made the one mistake that mattered most. Before we talk about consequences, it's important to understand why this crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. This wasn't about rules being bent or mistakes being made. This was about family safety, and in his world, nothing ranked higher than that. Before we talk about punishment, we need to talk about boundaries. Certain spaces were sacred. His home was one of them. His child was another. When someone violated those spaces, it wasn't seen as a personal offense. It was seen as a threat, and threats were never ignored, no matter how small they appeared on the surface. Before we talk about respect, we have to understand what respect really meant to him. It wasn't politeness. It wasn't obedience. It was knowing your place and honoring it without being reminded. By abusing her position, she didn't just break trust. She showed disregard for the structure that protected everyone inside that home. Before we talk about intent, we must talk about risk. Even if she believed her actions were harmless, the potential consequences were not. Any misuse of access created openings. Any opening created danger, and danger near his family was something he could not tolerate under any circumstances. Before we talk about emotion, we need to talk about responsibility. Being allowed near his child meant carrying an invisible weight, the responsibility to protect, not exploit, to observe limits, not test them, to understand that one careless action could invite chaos into a carefully controlled environment. Before we talk about forgiveness, we must talk about precedent. Allowing this behavior to slide would have sent a message, a dangerous message, that boundaries could be tested, that rules were flexible, that family safety could be compromised without consequence. And once that message spread, control would begin to slip. Before we talk about reaction, we have to understand restraint. He didn't respond out of rage. He responded out of principle. This wasn't emotional. It was structural. A correction meant to restore order, not express anger. Before we talk about fear, we need to talk about clarity. In his world, lines were clearly drawn. Everyone knew where they stood. When someone crossed those lines knowingly, they accepted whatever followed, whether they realized it or not. Before we talk about what came next, it's essential to recognize this truth. This situation was never about employment. It was about protection, about respect, about making it clear that family was untouchable. And once that understanding was violated, the outcome became inevitable. Before we talk about action, it's important to understand how carefully he treated information. In his world, rumors were noise, dangerous noise. Acting on them without proof could create chaos, destroy loyalty, and expose weakness. So he never moved on whispers alone. Before we talk about patience, we need to talk about discipline. He understood that truth reveals itself over time, if you don't interrupt it. Instead of confronting, he observed. Instead of questioning, he listened. He let people behave naturally, believing that the most honest version of someone appears when they think no one is paying attention. Before we talk about watching, we must talk about distance. He never made his attention obvious. No sudden changes, no visible suspicion. Everything stayed normal. Because the moment someone senses doubt, they adjust their behavior, and adjustment hides truth. Before we talk about verification, it's important to understand that confirmation mattered more than speed. He preferred certainty over reaction. He believed that moving too fast was a sign of insecurity. Waiting, on the other hand, showed control. Before we talk about details, we need to talk about consistency. He didn't rely on a single moment or event. He watched for repetition, patterns that repeated themselves without prompting, actions that continued even when circumstances changed. That's where reality lived. Before we talk about evidence, we must talk about silence again. He didn't ask questions that could tip anyone off. He didn't share concerns. He kept everything contained. Information moved upward to him, never outward from him. Before we talk about pressure, we have to understand restraint. Many people react when something feels wrong. He didn't. He allowed discomfort to exist without resolving it too quickly. That patience separated instinct from impulse. Before we talk about certainty, we need to talk about timing. He waited until there was no room for doubt, until the story told itself clearly, until intention was obvious, not assumed. Before we talk about truth becoming undeniable, it's important to recognize this. Watching, waiting, and verifying wasn't hesitation, it was strategy. In a world where one wrong move could ripple outward, he understood that the strongest position was one built on proof, not suspicion. Before we talk about the moment itself, it's important to understand how quiet it was. There was no shouting, no sudden movement, no raised voices. The tension didn't come from chaos, it came from stillness, from the sense that something had already been decided long before anyone spoke. Before we talk about her reaction, we need to talk about his presence. He didn't lean forward. He didn't pace. He sat comfortably, as if the situation required no effort at all. That calm carried weight. It signaled that this was not a discussion. It was an acknowledgement. Before we talk about words, we have to talk about silence. The silence stretched longer than expected, long enough for doubt to creep in, long enough for her confidence to crack. She waited for questions that never came, accusations that never arrived, and in that waiting she began to understand. Before we talk about realization, we need to talk about timing. She spoke too soon, trying to explain things that hadn't been mentioned. She corrected details no one had stated. In doing so, she revealed more than she intended. That's when the shift happened. Before we talk about fear, we must talk about awareness.
Okay.
Before we talk about awareness,
Let's talk about awareness.
she noticed that nothing she said surprised him. No reaction, no change in expression. That's when she realized he wasn't learning. He already knew. Before we talk about tension, we need to talk about control. The room belonged to him. The pace belonged to him.
Okay.
Every pause felt deliberate. Every moment stretched just enough to let the truth settle on its own. Before we talk about regret, we must talk about delays. She tried to backtrack, to soften statements, to reframe actions, but it was too late. The moment for explanation had passed before it ever began.
Okay.
Before we talk about power, we need to talk about inevitability. There was no dramatic reveal, no evidence laid out, no need for proof to be shown. The certainty was already present, and she could feel it. Before we talk about what followed, it's important to recognize this. The tension wasn't created by threat, it was created by understanding. The understanding that nothing left to say could change the outcome, and that realization arrived too late to matter. Before we talk about punishment, it's important to understand what mercy would have looked like. In most workplaces, mistakes or misbehavior are met with a simple consequence, a warning, a reprimand, or being let go. Being fired might seem harsh in one world, but in his world, it would have been mercy, because here, betrayal was not just an inconvenience, it was a breach of trust so serious that it threatened everything he protected. Before we talk about severity, we need to understand the weight of betrayal in his life. Loyalty wasn't optional, it wasn't a suggestion, it was a rule.
Okay.
And when someone who had been granted access to his home, his family, and his child chose to act against that trust,
Okay.
it wasn't a minor slip, it was a violation that demanded acknowledgement, correction, and in many cases, consequences, far beyond what ordinary society would consider fair. Before we talk about mercy, we must talk about standards. The standards he lived by were clear and absolute. Respect the rules, respect the space, respect the people around you. And those standards applied even when no one else was watching. Breaking them didn't just break trust with him, it broke the balance of his household. It disrupted the order he worked hard to maintain, and in that world, disruption carried consequences. Before we talk about firing, we need to talk about symbolism. Letting someone go would have symbolized that the mistake had a limit, that she had failed, but not fatally, that the line had been crossed, but it could have ended there. That would have been the kind of measured response most people never understood. Most people thought that in his world, mistakes were met with immediate retaliation, but mercy was quiet, deliberate, and rare. Before we talk about the choice he made, we must understand perspective. From the outside, it might seem extreme to punish betrayal so severely, but from his perspective, it was not about vengeance, it was about protection, about sending a message, about maintaining a system in which family safety and trust could never be compromised. Mercy in that context would have been giving her a chance to walk away before the consequences arrived. Before we talk about regret, we need to understand clarity. Firing would have been clean. It would have allowed her to leave, rethink her decisions, and understand that boundaries existed for a reason. Instead, she forced the situation to escalate by underestimating the weight of her actions, thinking that small betrayals could go unnoticed or forgiven. Before we talk about fear, we must talk about inevitability. In his world, betrayal was never taken lightly. The rules were silent, but they were understood, Anyone who stepped over them, even unknowingly, risked much more than employment. They risked respect, they risked safety, they risked the certainty that comes with being part of a protected inner circle. Before we talk about consequences, it's essential to recognize this mercy in his world was rare and meaningful. It wasn't given freely, and it wasn't forgotten. Being fired would have been a chance to walk away with dignity, but betrayal carries weight, and weight in his world always settles somewhere. Before we talk about the moment everything was decided, it's important to understand the rules he lived by. These weren't written laws or public proclamations. They were personal codes, learned through experience, and hardened by the world around him. They guided every choice he made, every movement, every relationship, and they were simple, yet absolute. Before we talk about the first rule, we need to understand why family came first. Protect family. That was not just a slogan, it was the foundation of his life. Family wasn't just people sharing a last name, it was the people whose safety and trust could never be compromised. Anyone allowed near them carried responsibility, not privilege. Protecting them meant watching quietly, thinking ahead, and ensuring that nothing, no threat, no mistake, no betrayal, ever reached them. Before we talk about the second rule, we need to understand the importance of consequences. Punish betrayal. In his world, loyalty was sacred. When someone who had been trusted chose to betray that trust, it was not a minor offense, it was a direct threat to everything he valued. Punishment was not about revenge, it was about restoring balance. It was about showing that the rules were real, that actions had weight, and that crossing the line carried inevitable consequences. Before we talk about how punishment worked, we must talk about clarity. He never acted on emotion alone. Punishment was deliberate, measured, and designed to teach as much as it corrected. It served as a reminder to others that trust could not be taken lightly, and that family safety was non-negotiable. Betrayal wasn't just about what someone did, it was about the signal it sent to everyone else. Allowing it to go unaddressed weakened the entire circle of protection he had built. Before we talk about the third rule, we need to understand vigilance. Never allow weakness near loved ones. Weakness, in his terms, wasn't just physical or strategic. It was carelessness, distraction, or a lack of discipline that could be exploited. Weakness could come from a friend, an employee, or even someone he considered loyal. It could expose his family to harm, or it could create doubt in the minds of those who watched him closely. Removing weakness didn't mean isolating people entirely. It meant ensuring that those closest could be relied upon under pressure. Before we talk about the broader impact, we must talk about consistency. These rules were enforced every day, in small and large ways alike. Every decision was filtered through them, every interaction measured against them. They were not flexible because circumstances were convenient. They were fixed because they preserved stability. Before we talk about lessons, we need to talk about perception. From the outside, these rules may seem harsh, but in his world, they were survival, they were protection, they were a guide to maintaining order when trust was rare, betrayal was real, and danger could appear anywhere. Following these rules didn't just define him, it defined the boundaries of his household, the safety of his family, and the respect others had for him. Before we talk about what happened next, it's essential to recognize that these rules were not suggestions. They were principles that governed life itself. Protect family, punish betrayal, never allow weakness near loved ones, and anyone who understood that knew exactly what was expected, and what could happen if those expectations were not met. This story didn't spread through loud headlines or public announcements. It moved quietly, whispered from one person to another, carried in subtle glances and careful conversations. Its power wasn't in drama, it was in the lesson it left behind. Those who heard it understood immediately. Proximity does not equal safety. Being close to power, to trust, or to someone respected and feared, comes with responsibility, and crossing the line, even once, can have consequences that echo far beyond the moment. This tale became a warning, a reminder that access is earned, loyalty is priceless, and betrayal carries weight that cannot be ignored. It teaches that in certain worlds, mistakes are measured not by intention, but by impact,
and the rules are always enforced whether anyone is watching or not. If you found this story eye-opening, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more untold stories, lessons from history, and insights that reveal the hidden rules behind trust, power, and loyalty.